With only 2 days left in 2015, perhaps you're forming some resolutions for the new year, like to lose weight or improve your finances. So what should your top priority be for 2016? Find out next on Grace to You. As you enjoy the last few days of 2015 and look forward to the new year, what type of spiritual goals are you making for 2016? Perhaps you're hoping to spend more time in prayer, be more disciplined in your study of God's Word, or attend church more consistently. As worthy as those goals are, they shouldn't be your ultimate concern in 2016. So what should be? Find out next on Grace to You as John Macarthur continues a series titled Enjoying God, showing you how to deepen your love for the Lord in the coming year and enjoy His presence each day. With that lesson, here now is John Macarthur.
Certainly it's apparent to you, if you're a Christian, as it is to me, that we live in a profane, godless, secularized, and for the most part atheistic culture. Even our religion is a kind of atheism, for it attempts to erase the true God and substitute in His place a God who makes men comfortable. The impact of Christianity on our country seems to be weak, seems to be shallow, it seems to be superficial, it seems to be saccharine. Being a Christian may be in, but it doesn't seem to be having much of an impact. We are caught up in a kind of self-indulgence and self-centeredness that even views God only in terms of what He can do for us. God becomes sort of a utilitarian genie. You rub your little theological lamp, He pops out and says 3 wishes. People are preoccupied with relational things. Person who criticizes the teaching of the Word of God by saying, well, it's too strong, it alienates people, is really saying we want a God who makes us comfortable. And I guess what I really see in Christianity as I look at it across our country is the absence of a theology. It just seems to me that there isn't one. There's a lot of talk about God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit. But in terms of a substantive definition of the Trinity and an understanding of theology, it just really isn't there. We're really big on relationships, and we certainly don't really understand the source of all of them, God Himself. And I guess if there's one element of theology that we really don't understand, it is the theology of God. Theology proper, it's called. We don't understand God, God's nature. The fundamental fact of our faith is God. And the fundamental fact about God is that God is holy. God is awful, if you want to use that sense. God is majestic. God is fearful. He is mighty. He is awesome. He is transcendent. In fact, in Exodus 15:11, it says He is glorious in holiness. The beauty of the Lord is the beauty of holiness. I don't think we understand the holiness of God. Now, I would also want to add that I don't think we can understand fully the holiness of God, but I think we can understand it a lot better than we do. And I want to share with you some things that the Spirit of God has just been running through my heart for the last couple of weeks about the holiness of God. I confess at the very beginning that I don't really understand the fullness of His holiness, but I'm sure working at it. The central thing I want you to see about God is that He is holy. And that weighs very heavily on our hearts if we understand it. In order to help us focus on that, I want you to take your Bible and turn to the 6th chapter of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 6. And I want us to examine the first part of the chapter, and I want us to see the holiness of God as Isaiah relates it to us here. Just a little background. Isaiah was a prophet, not just any prophet. Some feel perhaps the greatest prophet of Israel. Isaiah was a man who was a statesman, who spoke for God to common people and also to kings. He was known in the palace. In fact, he was a consultant to the monarchs. He prophesied during the reign of 4 kings, a time of great crisis, a time of great chaos, a time of moral decadence, a time when God's people were turning their backs on him. In fact, during the time of Isaiah's prophecy, the northern kingdom, Israel, was taken captive by invaders. The southern kingdom, Judah, was attacked by Assyria. These were unstable times, difficult times, and he had a very strategic ministry. In the midst of these days of Isaiah, there came along a king in Judah who, compared to the others, was a man of some influence, some goodness, some excellence. His name was Uzziah. He is mentioned in verse 1. Uzziah reigned for a long time, 52 years. And he was generally a successful king and brought benefits to his people. In fact, he subdued most of the hereditary enemies of Judah and brought them some time of peace. He was able to turn Jerusalem into a fortified city, well equipped with arms for its own defense, and he gave the people a great sense of security. According to 2 Chronicles chapter 26, he developed agriculture and he developed commerce for the nation until it became extremely prosperous. The sad story of Uzziah is that in the end, pride lifted up his heart. He looked at all the things he'd done, given them a time of peace from their enemies, fortified Jerusalem, brought security, developed agriculture and commerce. He was filled with pride, and God gave him terminal.
Who God ever used. He didn't use them because they always had so much light, so much knowledge, so much goodness. You see all this other stuff. Everybody's posting on Instagram, and they got all these lights that are so flattering and all these filters. But the God of 4 a.m., the God of 4 a.m., the God who got up from the grave in the physical body of a man named Jesus. In John 20, verse 1, it says, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb. Why? He didn't get up when the light came out. Easter didn't start with a sunrise. It started in the dark. So if you are in the dark today and you don't know and you can't feel, and my God, why have you forsaken me? And how does this end? And why does it hurt? And when does it stop? And when can I leave? I need you to know that he's watching you and keeping you and holding you and with you in the 4th watch of the night. Yes, there's a star that guides you. Yes, there's a light that guides you. Yes, there are blessings that attend you. Yes, there is favor that you can feel, and you will experience all of those things. But sometimes he's going to tell you things in the night and lead you through things at the night. And what he does at the night, you will be shouting about in the day. Because this is why you got to hold on. This is why you can't give up. This is why you got to get help. This is why you got to work through it. This is why you can't accept defeat. This is why Herod's searching for you, but he couldn't find you yet. He couldn't kill you yet. What he couldn't kill is Christ in you, the hope of glory. And he leads me not just with a star. Not yet, not yet, not yet. Y'all don't want to go yet, do you? Y'all don't want to go yet, do you? Y'all got enough battles at home? Just stay with me for a minute. Get under this blessing for a minute. The night is coming when no man can work. Let us work the works of him who sent us. He's watching over me. Yes, he is. Because I got something in common with Mary and Joseph. I'm carrying Jesus. I got Jesus on the inside of me. Everything that God spoke to Joseph that confirmed his word, he did it at night. In a dream, take Mary home. In a dream, go to Egypt. In a dream, go back to Nazareth. Everything God did in Joseph's life, he did it at night. What is he doing on the night watch for you right now? What is he doing? I'm telling you, we're going to be shouting about it tomorrow, but right now it's night. Right now it's night. I always feel like coming out here to preach is a little bit like a detective novel. I'm trying to find, who are you? Who are you that God gave me this word for? That he just stirred me up to, like I told Graham, I feel like I'm about to give birth. Who are you? What are you carrying? What does Herod know about you that has him trying to track you down and kill you? Why has the attack been so strong? If you were not carrying Jesus, if you were not sent for purpose, if there was not a prophecy over your life, you wouldn't be feeling any pain. The pain is a labor pain. You're about to bring something forth. And it made me think that this is not the only Joseph. That there's another Joseph who had to go to Egypt. Y'all know the other Joseph? Y'all know OT Joseph? Old Testament Joseph? Y'all know Joseph? Put it in the chat. I know Joseph. I know Joseph. I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. You're not talking about Joseph who married Mary. You're talking about Joseph who was promised that God would raise him up to feed his whole family and save his whole nation in a time of famine. That Joseph who saw the stars and saw the grain, but God didn't show him everything he would go through. God kept him in the dark. He didn't tell him, your brothers are going to betray you, the very ones you're going to have to feed. You're going through something right now and you didn't see this coming. He didn't see himself pushed into a cistern. He didn't see himself sold into slavery. He didn't see himself rotting away in a prison while he was forgotten by the cupbearer and the baker. But you know what Joseph told me to tell you? God kept me in the dark. He was with me. He kept me. He held me steady. He held me down. He held me level. He kept me sane. He preserved my mind. He walked with me through the valley of the shadow of death. I will fear no evil. He's with me. That's how I'm here. He kept me. Everybody God kept, give him praise right here. He kept me. Oh, he kept me in the dark. He kept me in the dark. He kept me from killing myself. He kept me from walking away. He kept me from giving up my dream. He kept me from turning my back on my faith. I'm not here because I always walked in the light. I'm here because he kept me in the dark. That's how I got here. He kept me in the dark. He didn't tell me everything. That's how he got me here. He told me one thing at a time. And that's how he's going to speak to you. One thing at a time. One thing at a time. Give us this day our daily bread. He kept me in the dark. If God told you everything, you start spazzing out. We have to call the ambulance to your campus. I used to pray, and I still pray. God, give me light. But this is a Christmas prayer. God, keep me in the dark. When I doubt you, don't let me deny you. Yeah. One man said from the 1920s, don't forget in the darkness what you learned in the light. He got up at night. Joseph went to Egypt. You're following God right now to a strange place. I know you are. He spoke to me about you. He said to tell you, I'm keeping you in the dark. You got to turn it over. You got to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your...
I don't mean a continuation of business as usual. I mean stepping into another dimension of anything you have ever done before, and you've been afraid of it, and you've been staring at it, and you've been looking at it, and you've been thinking about it, and you've been dreaming about it, but you haven't been moving on it because you're afraid of it. I rebuke the spirit of fear. Greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. God is going to do what God is going to do. Oh, I feel a shout coming in the house. I feel a praise coming in the house as my spirit receives this word and ingests it and digests it and appropriates it. It also drives out the toxicity of fear and intimidation and procrastination. You're not procrastinating because you're lazy. You're procrastinating because you're afraid. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. How big are they? What does the land look like? What do they wear in that setting? What is an appropriate conversation for what's next in my life? Oh. I feel a prophetic utterance. I'm going to take my time with this because I feel like this is prophetic in the life of somebody that you've been knowing for the last couple of years that things were about to shift for you. And you've been standing there staring at it. You heard about it. You felt it. You sensed it. But it doesn't fit where you came from. And God is going to cause you to take a leap of faith into a realm that you've never been in before. And you're going to step into it. The entrance of thy word giveth light. The entrance of thy word giveth light. When you take in the word, it gives light, which when you have light on the inside is called enlightenment. Enlightenment. Enlightenment cannot be measured. External light can be measured. The lumens from external light can be measured, but the lumens on internal light, there is no mechanism to control enlightenment. The devil doesn't mind you turning lights on the outside. He doesn't want you to have lights turned on the inside. But this word that I'm preaching to you this morning is getting ready to lighten you up until you're enlightened and prepared for what God is about to do next in your life. Whatever you do, don't click me off right now, because I'm getting ready to get you ready for what you're about to step into. God doesn't want you to step into it as a fool with assumptions and ideas that are inaccurate. Because if you step into it as a fool, when the wind blows, the house will come down because you didn't build it on a rock. You didn't build it on a fact. You didn't build it with a clear understanding. So Moses, in an attempt to assess, he's already done an assessment of who he's got with him and what he has. He is now assessing what he's up against. He doesn't start a fight without assessing what he's up against. He doesn't make assumptions about what it takes to do what I see. It's one thing to hear me preach on Sunday morning, but you cannot assess what it costs to be me by watching me preach on Sunday morning, because that is just the chicken wing part of what leadership takes to run this. You don't know the multiplicity of issues and actions that are necessary that goes into any decision that we make. You don't know that if we're going to have a leadership conference, we have to make sure that we put people in the safest possible environment. So that means we have to spray the room. We have to change the mics. We have to make sure that we do social distancing. We have to count all of that up because of the times that we're moving in. Extra measures and precautions have to be taken, and we have to meet about it, and we have to talk about it, and we have to strategize, and we have to talk to the hotel managers, and we have to manage their expectations and their cleanliness and their methodology before we do recommendations. It's not about just, can you speak to the leaders? It's about making sure that you have done due diligence to protect what God has given you. So Moses has assessed what he has, and now he has sent the spies to assess what he's up against. Have you had anybody spy out what you're up against? I get calls all the time for people who say, they say, the interviewers ask me all the time, what's a typical day in the life of TD Jakes? Which I laugh, because there is no typical day. Every day is a surprise. You know, every day is different. Every day is new. Every day is unpredictable. And it's hard for me to describe for them. There are a lot of things I can't do. People who want you to have an appointment every Monday and every Wednesday at 2 o'clock drive me crazy, because my Mondays and Wednesdays are not typical. Suppose I have a funeral. Suppose I have a crisis. Suppose we're shooting a movie. Suppose I have an interview about the movie. Suppose we have a situation where we have to negotiate to be able to provide products for a hospital overseas. I can't be locked up to a schedule. Other people might be able to do that. So you have to know what your need is like, and then assess what you're up against. The text before us is after the analysis behind it that has evaluated what they have, and now they're going to see what it takes for what's next. Because never assume that what's next is like where you've been. Never assume that you can get married and still be single. Never think for a minute that having...
Ride it on out.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Get to know him. Yeah, go get to know him.
See, the problem with you and your wife ain't nobody talking about leaving nobody. You ain't leaving her. She ain't leaving you. She ain't leaving him. He ain't leaving her.
They just cool, huh?
Cool.
69.
Man.
So the age has something to do with it?
Yeah, it's 69, dog. You've adjusted. You love her as your friend and your wife.
Yeah.
What's some
They're not
questions-
intimate.
What's some questions? What's some questions he could ask her about?
Hey, baby, you y'all hungry? So, what y'all want to watch tonight?
Netflix and chill.
Yeah, they in there.
Hey, bro, you see him on the house shoe?
That's my favorite pair.
They're a throuple.
That's it. I was right.
Man, okay.
Baby, we're going to all sit here on this couch watching this movie. We need to go in there and get that comfort off the bed. Because these little throws, I'm not under a throw. Y'all got both the throws now. We're going to need this comforter.
They selfish.
I love a good throw, though, Steve. I
Right?
love a good throw, baby.
On
yes.
the couch.
Y'all got to ask you no more about drinking all the Kool-Aid now.
All right. Thank you, CLO. Coming up at the top of the hour, as promised, Stephen A. Smith, right after this.
You're listening to the Steve Harvey Morning Show.
In 2018, it was reported there was a dramatic rise in the number of cases of demonic possession. For many of the most disturbing cases, Father Carlos Martins was often summoned.
I have seen things, very evil things.
I order you to go in the name of Christ.
I'm not leaving. We've been together too long. He needs me.
Listen to The Exorcist Files on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Paper Ghosts is a true crime podcast investigating the mysterious disappearance and brutal, unsolved murder of Tammy Zawicki.
They just kept telling us from the beginning, she'll be back, she'll be back.
We had no clue where she was. Didn't know where to begin looking.
Tammy's story shocked the nation. The deeper I searched, the more troubling things I found.
The best lead, the best evidence, the best witness was blown off.
Listen to Paper Ghosts on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite shows.
Did you know Lance Bass is a Russian-trained astronaut? That he went through training in a secret facility outside Moscow, hoping to become the youngest person to go to space? Well, I ought to know, because I'm Lance Bass. And I'm hosting a new podcast that tells my crazy story and an even crazier story about a Russian astronaut who found himself stuck in space with no country to bring him down. With the Soviet Union collapsing around him, he orbited the Earth for 313 days that changed the world. Listen to The Last Soviet on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What's coming? So they're the first people in the unexplored territory, and then the more propositional philosophers and such and the scientists, they fill in the details. But the trailblazing has already been done by the imaginative and the intuitive.
Right.
And so Jung, in Ion, Jung tracks, well, that's okay. In Ion, Jung tracks the contents of that imagination back several thousand years, and also lays out something like a scheme for the future. So, for example, he believed that, this is so strange, man. He believed that the idea that there were wise men who saw a star that signified Christ's birth was actually a reference to the astrological idea that something new would be born at the dawn of the age of Pisces. Pisces
How does that get
is
to one
fish.
star?
Well, because they were interpreters of the stars. So Pisces is a constellation that's characterized by a fish going in one direction and a fish going in the other. And Jung was very interested in the use of fish symbolism in Christianity. He associated that with the astrological imagination. He also believed that the 2,000-year period from Christ's birth roughly to now was characterized by two ions, one which was explicitly Christian, that's the fish moving in one direction, and the other, which led to the development of empirical science, was an antithesis. And that had been foreshadowed by this symbolism, which was part of the intuitive discovery of that which was yet to come. And that's only part of the argument. And it's an unbelievably profound book, and it's terrifying once you understand what he's talking about. And I've never seen anyone criticize it who actually understood it. You know, almost all the criticisms I've seen of Jung and his thinking, it's like, no, you're not hitting the target there, buddy. He's asking questions that you don't even know need to be asked. So you're not in you're not in the ball game. So
yeah.
In any case,
the more scientific minded people
Yeah, well, the more propositionally minded people. See, Jung had a problem with the propositional universe. He said, yeah, well, there's a gap between what we know and the unknown per se. Well, what fills that gap? Well, dreams. Dreams, the imagination, imagery. It's at the boundary of propositional thought, and it's between us and what we absolutely don't know. And the visionary artists operate in the domain of imagination and pave the path for the propositional types. And think about the relationship, say, between Dostoevsky and Nietzsche. Nietzsche was much more propositional than Dostoevsky, but Dostoevsky fundamentally is deeper. Now, he's not as clear, right? That's the trade-off. Everything in Nietzsche is in Dostoevsky, and more is in Dostoevsky. And Nietzsche himself knew that. I mean, he was no piker when it came to appreciation, let's say, of works of the imagination. But that's a good way of thinking. And then you see this too. I saw this great lecture by Jonathan Pajot, which I'm going to put up on my YouTube channel, where he spent about 20 minutes explaining the meaning of an Orthodox icon that showed a serpent. I don't want to get into it, it's too complicated, but there's so much in that image, you just can't believe it. And you think, well, how did it all get there? And it's akin to the question you asked about the mathematician. It's like, who has plumbed the depths of the human soul? No one. Where do these ideas come from? Well, they appear in my head. You think that's an explanation? The ideas appear where in your head exactly? What do you mean by your head? Do you mean physically? Like, what do you mean? Well, you don't know what you mean. And God only knows where ideas come from. And to think that they just spring fully formed out of the void without a huge developmental history is naive in the extreme.
Yeah, it's like who built the Sistine Chapel? Was it Michelangelo? Not who painted. And well, in some sense, yes, but also he came from a myriad of people before him. And not only that, but the Bible, and also thousands and thousands of years before. To me, these scientists who I'm not trying to demean scientists in any way. I mean, the rationally atheistic-minded scientists, and I'm strawmanning them when I'm saying that. So let me just pick someone, Krauss. So Krauss, to pick on Krauss. Krauss looks at phenomena in an extremely depthless manner. Now, obviously he doesn't. But what I mean is, it's almost like someone who's at the top of the trees and they're so far up that they don't realize that there's roots beneath them, that they've forgotten that there's roots and they think that they don't need it. They dislike what doesn't make sense.
Part of this. That's right. That's exactly. That's part of this. See, Krauss is a great physicist but there's a lot of what he does that he regards as self-evident and is never questioned. And it's sort of a precondition for what he does as a physicist, because, if you're a physicist, you're off doing physics. You're not questioning your presumptions, except maybe in the domain of physics. But a lot of what he regards as self-evident just simply isn't self-evident. It's not. And that's a real problem when it comes to discussions about what's real. And you brought up a couple of issues earlier that are really worth returning to. One issue is, what is the one that unites the many? And you might say, well, we don't need one that unites the many. We can have a diverse range of values, let's say. Then you have the problem of conflict, confusion, and anxiety, plus hopelessness, because you don't really have a goal. It's not like that polytheism, let's say, is without a cost. It's fragmentary. And it causes social havoc, because person A will pursue value A and person B will pursue value B. And that's okay if they're united under a higher order structure that unites them in some sense, but it's not okay at all. It's the situation in the desert when Moses is leading his people away from Egypt, right? It's the central organizing principle was the Egyptian totalitarian state had dissolved. And what happens is this descent into a fragmentation. And that's extremely dangerous. It's not the promised land, that's for sure. So the question is, well, what's the one that unites the many? That's the central religious question. So then, and can't you say that the one that unites the many is the most real? Well, then you're in the domain of definition, right? At that point, it starts to become like a definition rather than a proposition.
That's why when you ask people to define, well, what is real, it just becomes tautological. Not that tautologies are trivial. So, for example, there's Chris Langan. He has one of the highest IQs recorded, along with Savant, I believe. He builds his theory. He builds his theory of everything in some sense from a super tautology. It's an apodictic
Well, that's God's definition of himself, right? I am that I am. That's God's definition of himself in the Bible.
Yeah, okay, man. I think we should get to the definitions of God. This is extremely interesting. So you mentioned what stays constant.
We tried it to one part, right? Well, that's a good question. You know, I think it's the Spirit that guides our sequential transformations upward to a higher and higher form of unity, and maybe a higher and higher form of delight and love.
Do you think that we're all God? I'm sure you've heard some people say that we're God, but we forget.
Hi, my name is Father Mike Schmitz, and you're listening to the Bible in a Year podcast, where we encounter God's voice and live life through the lens of Scripture. The Bible in a Year podcast is brought to you by Ascension. Using the Great Adventure Bible timeline, we'll read all the way from Genesis to Revelation, discovering how the story of salvation unfolds and how we fit into that story today. It is day 296. We're reading 1 Maccabees chapter 15, also Sirach chapters 36 and 37, as well as Proverbs chapter 23, verses 26 through 28. As always, the Bible translation I'm reading from is the Revised Standard Version, Second Catholic Edition. I'm using the Great Adventure Bible from Ascension. If you want to download your own Bible in a Year reading plan, you can visit ascensionpress.com/Bible in a Year. You can also subscribe to this podcast and receive daily episodes and daily updates, and automatically you will be enrolled in the I don't know what you're enrolled in. You get the updates on your podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. As I said, it's day 296. We're reading 1 Maccabees chapter 15. We're almost at the end. We only have one more chapter after this, and then we go into 2 Maccabees, which is going to be, gosh, you guys, you're going to love it. I'm telling you right now. 1 Maccabees chapter 15, Sirach 36 and 37, as well as Proverbs 23, verses 26 through 28. The first book of Maccabees, chapter 15. Letter of Antiochus the Seventh. Antiochus, the son of Demetrius the king, sent a letter from the islands of the sea to Simon, the priest and ethnarch of the Jews, and to all the nation. Its contents were as follows. King Antiochus, to Simon the high priest and ethnarch, and to the nation of the Jews, greeting. Whereas certain pestilent men have gained control of the kingdom of our fathers, and I intend to lay claim to the kingdom, so that I may restore it as it formerly was, and have recruited a host of mercenary troops, and have equipped warships, and intend to make a landing in the country, so that I may proceed against those who have destroyed our country, and those who have devastated many cities in my kingdom. Now therefore, I confirm to you all the tax remissions that the kings before me have granted you, and release from all the other payments from which they have released you. I permit you to mint your own coinage as money for your country, and I grant freedom to Jerusalem and the sanctuary. All the weapons which you have prepared and the strongholds which you have built and now hold shall remain yours. Every debt you owe to the royal treasury and any such future debts shall be canceled for you from now on and for all time. When we gain control of our kingdom, we will bestow great honor upon you and your nation and the temple, so that your glory will become manifest in all the earth. In the 174th year, Antiochus set out and invaded the land of his fathers. All the troops rallied to him, so that there were few with Trypho. Antiochus pursued him, and he came in his flight to Dor, which is by the sea. For he knew that troubles had converged upon him, and his troops had deserted him. So Antiochus encamped against Dor, and with him were 120,000 warriors and 8,000 cavalry. He surrounded the city, and the ships joined battle from the sea. He pressed the city hard from land and sea, and permitted no one to leave or enter it. Rome supports the Jews. Then Numenius and his companions arrived from Rome with letters to the kings and countries, in which the following was written. Lucius, consul of the Romans, to King Ptolemy, greeting. The envoys of the Jews have come to us as our friends and allies to renew our ancient friendship and allegiance. They had been sent by Simon the high priest and by the people of the Jews, and have brought a gold shield weighing 1,000 minas. We therefore have decided to write to the kings and countries that they should not seek their harm or make war against them and their cities and their country, or make alliance with those who war against them. And it has seemed good to us to accept the shield from them. Therefore, if any pestilent men have fled to you from their country, hand them over to Simon the high priest, that he may punish them according to their law. The consul wrote the same thing to Demetrius the king, and to Attalus, and Ariathes, and Arsaces, and to all the countries, and to Sampsames, and to the Spartans, and to Delos, and to Mindos, and to Sicon, and to Caria, and to Samos, and to Pamphylia, and to Lycia, and to Helicarnassus, and to Rhodes, and to Phasaelis, and to Cos, and to Sidon, and to Aridus, and Gortyna, and Cnidus, and to Cyprus and Cyrene. They also sent a copy of these things to Simon the high priest. Antiochus VII threatens Simon. Antiochus the king besieged Dor anew, continually throwing his forces against it and making engines of war. And he shut Trypho up and kept him from going out or in. And Simon sent to Antiochus 2,000 picked men to fight for him, and silver and gold and much military equipment. But he refused to receive them, and he broke all the agreements he formerly had made with Simon, and became estranged from him. He sent him to Athenobius, one of his friends, to confer with him, saying, "You hold control of Joppa and Gazarah, and the citadel in Jerusalem. They are cities of my kingdom. You have devastated their territory. You have done great damage in the land, and you have taken possession of many places in my kingdom. Now then, hand over the cities which you have seized, and the tribute money of the places which you have conquered outside the borders of Judea, or else give me for them 500 talents of silver, and for the destruction that you have caused, and the tribute money of the cities 500 talents more. Otherwise we will come and conquer you." So Athenobius, the friend of the king, came to Jerusalem, and when he saw the splendor of Simon, and the sideboard with its gold and silver plate, and his great magnificence, he was amazed. He reported to him the words of the king, but Simon gave him this reply: "We have neither taken foreign land nor seized foreign property, but only the inheritance of our fathers, which at one time had been unjustly taken by our enemies. Now that we have taken opportunity, we are firmly holding the inheritance of our fathers. As for Joppa and Gazarah, which you demand, they were causing great damage among the people and to our land. For them we will give you 100 talents. Athenobius did not answer him a word, but returned in wrath to the king, and reported to him these words and the splendor of Simon and all that he had seen. And the king was greatly angered. Victory over Cendebeus. Now Trypho embarked on a ship and escaped to Orthosia. Then the king made Cendebeus commander-in-chief of the coastal country, and gave him troops of infantry and cavalry. He commanded him to encamp against Judea, and commanded him to build up Kedron and fortify its gates, and to make war on the people. But the king pursued Trypho. So Cendebeus came to Jamnia, and began to provoke the people, and invade Judea, and take the people captive, and kill them. He built up Kedron, and stationed there horsemen and troops, so that they might go out and make raids along the highways of Judea, as the king had ordered him. The Book of Sirach, chapter 36. A prayer for God's people. Wise sayings. Have mercy upon us, O Lord, the God of all, and look upon us, and show us the light of your mercy. Send fear of you upon the nations. Lift up your hand against foreign nations, and let them see your might. As in us you have been sanctified before them, so in them may you be magnified before us. And let them know you as we have known, that there is no God but you, O Lord. Show signs anew, and work further wonders. Make your hand and your right arm glorious. Rouse your anger and pour out your wrath. Destroy the adversary and wipe out the enemy. Hasten the day and remember the appointed time, and let people recount your mighty deeds. Let him who survives be consumed in the fiery wrath, and may those who harm your people meet destruction. Crush the heads of the rulers of the enemy, who say, there is no one but ourselves. Gather all the tribes of Jacob and give them their inheritance as at the beginning. Have mercy, O Lord, upon the people called by your name, upon Israel, whom you have likened to a firstborn son. Have pity on the city of your sanctuary, Jerusalem, the place of your rest. Fill Zion with the celebration of your wondrous deeds, and your temple with your glory.
I've not lost one suicide out of thousands. We've been filled with those people. Someone only takes their life when they believe that dying is less painful than living, as you know. And when you can shift that, you can shift anyone. So if you're interested, I'll send you some resources in that area. And if I can ever be helpful to you outside this conversation, brother, you can count on me, because I do have that skill regardless of the color of my skin. And it's been my lifelong work. I'd love to know just how you came to make the shifts in your own life. I know you started out, if I understand your history, selling drugs. You got a pretty tough background, to say the least, and yet now you're a worldwide influencer and you inspire people around the world. And I know you don't feel that way right now. How could you, with what you've been through again? But I'd love to know a little bit of the path, because that path shows people what's possible. You're an example. That's why I wanted to bring you on, because you're an extraordinary human being, and it's not because you had it easy, that's for sure. So tell us, if you would, just a little about that, and then tell us a little bit about, what your core message is for America today. What do you want? What do you want to come out of this as well? But first, tell us a little bit about your journey, if you would.
I grew up, I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, raised in a small town called Moncks Corner.
And I grew up on this very small dirt road in a single wide trailer. And it was my mother and my father and my oldest sister and me. And then my mother and father had two younger brothers and a younger sister. And, you know, everything that I got into as a child, especially when it came to like crime, I bought all of that on myself. You know, my father was definitely, you know, the bad seed from bad sperm. He was, you know, had his own problems with substance abuse, and he had his own problems with mental health. And he was, you know, a drug user, but then he was also a drug seller. So he had that side in him, but he was also a good man as well. He was a great man. You know, he was a great man who, you know, knew how to do construction, knew how to use his hands. So, you know, even at his worst, I always saw him bounce back and, you know, become his best. You know, we had and I learned this through therapy. I had my own issues with him just because of how I watched him, you know, treat my mother, because him and my mother ended up getting a divorce. They've been divorced for like 20 plus years now. But, you know, I watched him, you know, having a whole other family on the side, and, you know, things like that, you know, bother you as a child, and then you kind of suppress it, and then it comes back later on in your life, and, you know, you are in a relationship, and, you know, you might, you know, cheat, and then you're like, man, I don't want to lose my family, you know, like my father lost his. But, you know, we in a good place now. But the beauty about my father and my mother was an English teacher and a Jehovah's Witness, and my grandmother was a Baptist. So I always had spirituality. I always had some type of spiritual foundation. Like, my mother would always give me watchtowers and awakes to read, and, you know, we would go out in field service every Saturday, and that was, you know, eye-opening for me, because they were actually being witnesses for God. That's what Jehovah's Witnesses mean, being witnesses of Jehovah. And they were, even though people would say that they were annoying, but it's like, yo, you kind of should be annoying when you're trying to, you know, push the work of a higher power, you know. And literally every Saturday morning, that's something that we would do. And she was an English teacher, so she would always keep a book in my face, you know, and she would always tell me to read things that don't pertain to me. And that's kind of where I guess I developed an appetite for everything. I guess that's where I'm always willing to, you know, have conversations with anybody, because I saw other worldviews, you know, other than my own. And I was like a super intelligent kid, like as far as grades, until I got to about 6th grade. And when I got to 6th grade, I was the guy who was hanging around all of the white kids in my class, because that's all that was in my class. It was only like 3 other kids in my class, because it was like, they used to have it in tiers. So it was like A tier was the best, and then B tier, and then everything else. Our A and C was the best, and then like B and D was like the bad kids. So I was always in A tier. And there was only like 3 other black kids in that class, so we all would hang out amongst each other. But then all my cousins who were, you know, already on the wrong path, they wasn't having that at all. So they literally would bully me all the time. Like I used to have the fanny pack and the glasses. So in 6th grade, they would bully me. And it just got to the point, I remember one day my glasses just fell off and shattered and hit the ground. And I was like, man, if you can't beat them, join them. And so I just started running with that crowd. And literally that lasted for about probably 4 or 5 years, because from the time I made that decision in 7th grade to run with that crowd, the behavior just got worse. So the acting up in school, and then finally getting to high school, and then getting introduced to, you know, selling drugs, because people that were my age had started to get into that. And so like once I started getting suspended all the time from school and not wanting to tell my parents, I'll be cutting at somebody's house, that's how you get into the criminal lifestyle. And then when I got expelled from school around, like I think I was in 10th grade, I was all the way in the street at that point. I went to jail for like 45, 50 days. And when I came home, I tried to get my life on the right path. So I had a job. I worked at a warehouse called Industrial Acoustics Company. That didn't work right for me. Then I ended up working at a flower garden. That didn't go well for me. So I was just like, bumping, I'm gonna do what everybody else doing. So I started selling dope. And when I started selling dope, the first time I ever got locked up for drugs was that was the time when I finally said, all right, enough is enough. Because my father would always tell me that if I don't change my lifestyle, I'm gonna end up in jail, dead, or broke sitting under the tree. So when you're young and you start to actually see that reality, you start to see people that you actually loved, you know, growing up to be just washed, and they're sitting under the tree not doing nothing with their life, and you got people that you were peers with and went to school with, they end up in jail, and you got friends that, you know, have gotten killed. It's just like, I don't want to be that. And so for whatever reason, I thank God that he just gave me the vision to see what life would be tomorrow. Because I always said, whatever you do in your life today directly impacts what happens in your life tomorrow. So I just started working a whole bunch of odd jobs. And like most brothers in the hood, I wanted to rap. And I was in this recording studio one time, and I met this guy named Willie Will. Willie Will was a radio personality. And I just asked him, I said, how did you get into radio? And he said, I just went down there and got an internship. This is 1998 in Charleston, South Carolina. So things were a lot different back then. But I went down to the radio station, filled out the internship papers, and got an internship. And that was the most positive setting I had ever been in my life. Just being in this corporate environment and having this corporate structure, it just really helped me a lot. And the first time I ever cracked that microphone, I was just like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So even when you ask me about, being a cultural influencer, that's not something that I, sought out to do. Yeah. I just always remember when my father, one of the first two books my father ever gave me was The Autobiography of Malcolm X and Message to the Black Man by Elijah Muhammad. And Malcolm X always said, the person who controls the media controls the minds of the masses. Yep. So being that I've always had that thought in my head, I've always attempted to do that. I've always attempted to be the perfect balance of ratchetness and righteousness, because I am a full human being. And I say full because I don't think I'm quite whole yet. I think whole is a journey that you get to when you really start, digging in deep when it comes to your mindfulness and your mental health. So I'm getting to that journey of wholeness. And I don't know if I'll ever be whole, but I am full. And being that I'm full, I have a wide range of interests and a wide range of things that I'm into. And like I said, I like to have conversations.
My life in ministry, being the example of the person. By the way, Young, Restless, and Reformed, never thought I was part of that. All of a sudden, apparently I am. But anyway, so if you disagree, I want to first and foremost say I respect you. I do love you for Jesus' sake. And I have no intention of going into a battle with you to try to have you change your mind. I want you to have your convictions before you and your master. And I have my convictions before my master. So in terms of that discussion, I want to be gracious to another brother that disagrees, first and foremost. I'm not in this to say, let me try to change your mind. Now, I think that there's a more consistent biblical position, I think. And I'm always willing to be corrected, but these verses in Scripture that, again, in Deuteronomy 14, have people taking alcoholic wine and turning it into capital for worship, I think is very consistent with going to a restaurant and a private restaurant owner saying, I would like to take the money that I made from these beer samplers and give it to your church. Mm-hmm. Now, in the Bible, someone says, well, I struggle with it. I would say, why do you struggle with it? Is alcohol a sin? Well, no, it's not a sin. Okay, so if some money is made at a single event at the end of ReformCon by a private restaurant owner, and it's given to Apologia Church for its next leg of the mission, why is that sinful? I would say I can actually point to examples in the Scriptures where wine is used as part of actual worship.
But it's unfamiliar with us.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the thing, is that we're allowing our experience, our traditions, to actually dictate what is holy behavior, rather than saying, what does the Scriptures say? Because here's the thing, Jesus, at a public event, turned water into alcoholic wine. Drunkenness forbidden. Jesus was not a drunkard, although he apparently drank alcohol in certain contexts to where people could accuse him of being a drunkard, not because he was, but because they saw him with alcoholic beverages, and he did not abuse it. He's God in the flesh, and he's sinless. But he did it in public context. He also gave us wine at the table as part of worship. When someone says, you can't use money made from wine or beer for the church, I would say, well, Jesus gave us wine in worship. And I think that begins to unravel a bit of an inconsistency maybe in somebody's mind in terms of how they're thinking about it. However, I want to stress this. I'm not in it to say to the person that uses grape juice at the table, you're just doing it wrong and I'm going to prove you wrong. And I want to say, that's between you and the Lord. My own personal conviction is that it has a proper place for worship. Now, does that mean I want to go out now and start having on the corners advertising to unbelievers, beer fundraisers for Apologia Church? Yeah. Never has happened, never will happen. It was a particular context with people who have a certain conviction about this. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing, Jeff Durbin, the pastor in Arizona who's known for I was at church last night till 9:30, sitting with a couple whose son is struggling with heroin addiction. I'm the drug pastor, and that's what people know us as. How do I feel about this issue in the context of worship in the church? If you abuse alcohol, beer, wine, if you abuse drugs, I'm going to call you to repentance. If you're living a life of drunkenness, I'm going to call you out on it. I'm going to sit down with you and say, you need to come to Christ for this pleasure you're seeking. You need to come to Christ for this freedom from loneliness. You need to come to Christ for what you're running towards. And so that's how I feel about it.
All right, so this takes place. I declined being interviewed by Christian News. I told them, if you'd like to talk about what I'm going to be talking about, that's great. But I don't have any interest in talking about tone. This had nothing to do with holiness, sanctification, Christian freedom. That's a completely bogus, made-up thing that has been made up by other folks who are looking for a reason to get a fight going. But nothing came of it as far as an immediate article. Now, chronologically speaking, approximately 2 weeks later, something takes place in the studio, at Apologia Studios. Now, you weren't there, I don't believe. Were you there?
I was there. I was there for the first part of it, yeah. I was there for a little bit.
All right. Very quickly, you have a member of the church who is an artist.
Yep.
Does tattoos.
Yep.
And he is going to be moving to Kauai.
Yes.
But that's expensive to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so what y'all did is you put sandwich signs on people and sent them out into Tempe, right? That said, free tattoos, raise money for... Is that what happened?
Absolutely not. Claudia and his wife Shelley are full-time... They're in vocational ministry towards drug and alcoholic addicted people and the homeless. That's what they do full-time. He's also a tattoo artist. And he was short some money for this last leg of the mission, where we had to go out and do some final things before we start really getting ready to send people. And we had already spent a long time raising money. We've already been doing sales. We've already been people have been giving money, just hand over fist, just giving money away. He's aware of that people have already been given so much.
Mm-hmm.
Claudia decided to use his vocation as a tattoo artist to give tattoos to people so he could basically labor. These are people at Apologia Church. A few people have wanted these tattoos.
So they've talked to him about it.
And yes, and so a private message went out to about 8 or 10 people. Private message, not even to Apologia Church broadly, that Claudia would be doing tattoos, and you could pay him for the work that he would do. He just needed some extra funds for this last leg. And so that's what happened. It was at the studio because we don't own our own building, and that's where we could do it. And Claudia did some tattoos there.
Wait. So you're standing there in the middle of a church service, and they're doing tattoos?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It happened.
But that's how it sounded.
Well, it was actually in the news. An article was actually published that said Arizona Church has Bible, beer, and tattoo conference.
Right.
Absolutely false witness.
Yeah. Completely.
It's just pure false witness. And the struggle that it becomes difficult is when some of these news agencies are contacted. That never happened. It's completely false. They can see it and say, share's too good.
Never
exactly. Take it down.
It's click-throughs.
Even though it's complete false witness.
Click-throughs.
Never happened. So it was a private gathering of people at the studios, because that's the only space we have, really, we can use. And he used his vocation and labored for the exchange of money that went to him. The only person that didn't pay Claudia directly was Pastor Luke, because we pay all the bills anyways, and he had the ability to put the money in the account to pay the bills. And so that's what happened.
All right.
And by the way, there was no booze.
I was going to say, now this is interesting, because when this happened, unfortunately, the poor young man who is the primary person whose picture has been plastered all over the place is my son-in-law.
Yes.
And the reason for all this is evidently King Ginger, Marcus Pittman, who Rich Pierce says needs a new Nick. That Ginger was on Gilligan's Island, and that does not fit.
You're not allowed to have it, Mark.